Hello, coaches! Welcome back to another episode of Coach Better Spotlight. Today, we're sharing our 5th episode in our ongoing series featuring educators working in international schools in the Asia region. The teachers, coaches, school leaders, and parents on this call have been remote learning for up to 3 months already, and many are getting ready to start back to school in the next few days and weeks. Today's Spotlight focuses on what returning to school may look like for the foreseeable future, including the procedures for safe face-to-face learning, the realities of being back to school with expectations for social distancing, and the different ways that schools are managing hybrid learning, both online and face-to-face. In the full-length audio podcast, we also talk about some of the positive outcomes from remote learning that we'd like to see continue in the next academic year. Watch or listen to our previous episodes to see how things have evolved over time, and keep up with new posts and resources on our remote learning page at edurolearning.com. To hear the full conversation, subscribe to our Coach Better podcast wherever you get your podcasts, or head over to coachbetter.tv. All right, welcome back to another episode of Coach Better. Today, I am super excited to be here with our amazing panel of educators from all around the Asia region to talk about kind of next steps, next developments in our remote learning experience, particularly here in the Asia region where it has been going on for over 10 weeks. I think we'll get some more specific timelines from people on this call who I'm sure very clearly know exactly how long it has been that they have not been in school. And I'm just going to ask everybody to briefly say their name and where they currently are. And maybe you could say how long you've been remote learning. And if you're going back, like if you know that you have a date to return in the next chunk of time before summer. And then we have a couple questions that came up in the last call that we didn't get to talk about that we're going to dive deeper into today. So I will just start calling on people who I can see on my screen, and I'm going to start with Angela because you are on my screen right now.
I'm Angela Langlands. I work at WAB in Beijing. Yesterday, our 12th graders went back, though they are already finished with school. On May 11th, our 8th graders will be allowed to go back under strict provisions, and we have been out of school for 96 days.
Whew, okay.
A long time.
I'm going to go to Ben next.
Oh gosh, I was trying to figure out how long we've actually been out of school. I think it's like 6 or 7. Yeah. All right. Well, anyways, I'm Ben Sheridan. I'm a learning innovation coach at NIST International School here in Bangkok. So 6 or 7 weeks. And I don't think at this point we have any indication when we will go back, if at all, before the end of the year.
Thank you. And Amy, I see you next.
Hi, I'm Amy Garrett. I'm a tech coach at Hong Kong International School. We are in week 12 of online learning, and at this point we don't have a return date. The Hong Kong government has said they'll give us a 3-week notice, so everybody's just kind of watching and waiting, but it'll likely be a staggered return. I know this week some universities came back for Hong Kong exams, but it's been really sparse, and everyone's kind of waiting to hear what they say.
Thank you. And Sandra, I see you next on my screen.
Hi, I'm Sandra. I'm the Director of Innovation and Digital Learning at Keystone Academy in Beijing. We're in our 3rd month, probably the same number of days as Angela, but I didn't calculate it, so I don't want to say. And our 12th graders start school tomorrow, and they come back for a day, but our 9th graders will start May 11th.
Awesome. Thank you. And Jeff?
My name is Jeff Lehman. I'm a middle school design teacher at the International School in Beijing. Like everyone else in Beijing, we've been closed for a long time.
Thank you. And Annalie?
I'm Annalie Higginbottom. I am a secondary school technology instructional coach and K-12 technology coordinator at Shanghai American School's Pudong campus. And I think we're in week 13. I kind of have stopped counting. I think once you hit the 3-month mark, forget about it. You just keep going. We don't have an official date to return yet, but we are hoping to get that in the next few days / possibly hours.
Awesome. And Clint, I see you on my screen next.
Hi, I'm Clint. I'm also at the International School of Beijing with Jeff. I was just thinking about it. February 3rd was the day that we were supposed to go back to school, and we've been out ever since. So it's been a long time. I think we're 13 weeks. This is the 13th week.
And Tanya.
Hi, I'm Tanya LeClaire. I'm high school digital learning coach at Seoul Foreign School. I think it's 9 weeks. I can't remember, but we're just waiting for the Ministry of Education to give us the word, and potentially a staggered start in a few weeks, but still waiting.
Awesome. And last but not least, Marcello.
This is tough. I mean, we're in our 4th week.
Rookie.
I don't deserve to be here. Yeah, we're in our 4th week, and obviously we're not going to open again this year. In fact, we just met yesterday to look at the possibility of starting virtually in the fall, depending on what happens, because it's very, very in its infancy here. So that's where we're at. Yeah.
And Marcello, where are you?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm in Oman, in Muscat. Tazim.
Muscat. Okay.
Thank you. Awesome. So we can talk about a return to school, whether it's happening like now or in what we would call fall, which I know is not necessarily fall for everyone watching, listening, but August time. What does a return to school look like? What are we thinking about how school will look when we come back? And those of you that are actually in the process, you probably know more than those of us that are like, oh no, we're closed for the rest of the academic year. Haven't even thought about it yet. Jeff, I know you had your training today, so why don't you start us off and lay it on the line? What's going on at ISB?
Sure. Requirements are extremely stringent. We're going to start back with our seniors tomorrow. They're completely finished with everything, all their requirements for ISB. So they're just going to come back to do what I've heard is just a bunch of cool stuff, celebrating the year in ways that they have been robbed of. But in order to do that, ISB has totally transformed. I barely recognized it. When you walk in the front gate, there's lines on the pavement where you have to queue in order to get your temperature taken. We have the same infrared sensors that you would see at the airport to check fever. There's multiple checkpoints as you enter school. And then once you're in school, you have to wear a mask, of course. Classrooms have been set up so that there are a fixed amount of students in each room. Desks are, more than a meter apart. There's arrows in the hallways so that you actually have to walk on one side of the hallway and someone's on the other. Everything from our couches to our social seating that's in the halls and everywhere else, there's there's signs. It's one person on this giant couch only. It's the same school, but it's pretty unrecognizable. Teachers have had to go through training. Today I washed my hands following my nurse. We've had to take our body temperatures for the last 2 weeks and submit them to the government. Just a laundry list of pretty crazy stuff. We will welcome our 8th graders back in 2 weeks, and they'll kind of go through that whole thing too. I'm sure I'm forgetting things, but everything has been taken care of by the government and by ISB. Even getting to school, riding a bus, we can only sit staggered, one person each row, window aisle. If it means they have to send multiple buses when one would do, because we can't sit next to each other, then that's what they're going to do. So it's pretty significant. They're not they are taking no risks whatsoever.
I think that is so fascinating, and I want to hear what other schools are hearing and doing, and because I know that every province in China is approaching this a little bit differently. We had a little chat about that before the call started. What I think is super interesting is that's a lot of expectations, right? And that's in a country with a very high level of compliance. I keep comparing that to what is likely to happen in other places, perhaps the one that I live in, where yes, the intentions are there. Everyone wants to do the right thing. But what happens when, the bathroom doesn't get cleaned 4 times a day, or this one bathroom doesn't get cleaned 4 times a day? Because it's not even only a matter of, we have this expectations broadly, but then they come down to very granular areas. Like, okay, in this one classroom, they didn't sit, 2 desks apart or whatever it is. To me, the level of expectations and the level of compliance are both very high in China, and I'm so curious how that's going to play out in other parts of the world. But that's just my own
and another
interest.
thing, Kim, is these are also schools that can afford to comply.
True.
Right? When we're talking about this in very privileged schools, that is not how the rest of the world is going to open up their schools. They cannot afford for all of their cleaners, beyond their teachers and their food staff, but all their cleaners to go get the COVID tests, which they had to do here. And they can't afford to have the equipment to clean 4 times a day and we have a PPE room with more, 15,000 masks or something. It's an insanity. That is just not normal in the rest of the world. I don't think we can expect public schools around the world to be able to do this as safely. So, we can talk about this, but I'm not sure our experience is relevant to a lot of schools.
I think another thing that's really interesting about our opening, so similar to what Jeff was saying, we have a lot of guidelines. We have even dorm students who are quarantining for 14 days in a dorm room by themselves. But another component is we have some teachers who are still out of country. And so we just got our teachers used to what it looks like to be online fully. Now they have to get used to considering live students and online students at the same time, while some are in person and have to consider both, and some are online in another country and have to consider both. That's going to be very complex, and it takes another bit of training that we need to help teachers to think about, because it's so easy to go on and rattle on and go back to how we used to teach face-to-face and forget all about these 4 students who are still online.
We chose to make it. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think that's a very school-specific choice, though. I think at ISB, we've made the decision that even if you come back to campus, our focus is on still e-learning. It's not going to be split, a hybrid model where we have 7 people in the class, so we're going to teach them one thing, and we have 12 people who aren't in the class, so they have an online model. We've made that decision that actually, if you're coming back to campus, your expectation is that you will engage in the online learning just at campus, plus potentially with some other activities, or have the ability to see some of your classmates. And so I think for us, we've realized that that's going to be a huge ask of our teachers. I think something like 2/3 of our teachers are overseas at the moment, where 3/4 of our kids are in country. And so it just wasn't a feasible option for us.
Yeah,
we identified that same thing very, very early on. And we will give a date at which it would become back to campus, and we only do one or the other. It seems impossible to do both.
We're like
I want to clarify that. Sorry, before you go on. Marcello, are you saying that there will be a date when everyone comes back to campus and everyone must come back versus?
No, when we thought we might come back, of course it's a moot point now, but when we thought we might come back, we informed parents that when school opens again, we will only teach in person in the classroom. We won't, if you're still overseas and you choose not to come back, then you need to enroll in a different school, or you need to make a different choice, but we're not going to teach both populations.
So that is actually a little bit different than what CLINT is saying, because CLINT is saying that at ISB, when you come back, even if you're back, it's online learning. And Marcella, what you're saying in Oman is when school opens, everyone's expected to be there. And if you're not there, you're not going to get e-learning or remote learning or whatever we call it. Got it.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Annalise, sorry, please.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say we're very similar to ISB in that respect, in that we have a lot of our teachers here, but we also have a lot who are still overseas. And so the model that we're proceeding with between now and at least the end of the school year is that whatever happens physically on campus is to augment what is happening online, and that the primary source of learning will continue to be the online content, because we recognize that the class teacher for every single class is not necessarily going to be there. And while we can sub in departmental colleagues, they're really there in a kind of supervisory capacity to answer questions, to address concerns, and maybe facilitate some level of collaboration in person. But that in order to be as inclusive as possible and to ensure that everybody can access the same level of learning, whatever happens on campus is an extra, because we recognize that even when campus does reopen, not all of our students in Shanghai will choose to come back. Their families may choose to keep them at home for the time being.
And that's an interesting point by itself right there, because I don't think that's going to be exclusive to cities in China, that some families will decide to keep their children home. What happens when the majority are back, but there are some families that don't, for whatever reason, don't feel comfortable having their child back in school yet? And there's like a whole nother level of implication there, being that teachers may not have that choice, right? So then how do we manage that risk level for faculty versus family? Like, that's a whole nother interesting dynamic.
And that's that's not a choice that we're going to be giving the students. That if you're back, you're expected to be at school whenever that is for your grade level. But you cannot, unless you're, so for instance, an embassy family whose government will not let them come back, we will continue, they're a WAB student, they will continue, even if it's into next year, receive online education. But we will not offer, kid can't enroll into WAB into the online program. If you enroll in our school, the whole idea is that you are a present body in our school. So that won't be an option for new students. There will only be an option for students who were part of WAB this year under these circumstances.
I think it's also important what Angela was saying. I think next year is a different conversation altogether. We're talking about finishing this year, right? So for those two grade levels that Jeff mentioned, grade 12 and grade 8, particularly the grade 8 students, if they choose not to come back to campus, there's e-learning options for them. And if they choose to come back to campus, they also have those same e-learning options. Next year, come August, that's a whole other conversation that we need to have of what happens if we start in an e-learning environment. And those are conversations that I'm sure all schools are thinking about what those contingency plans are.
Yeah, and I think the most important is just keeping the student well-being at the utmost on your mind, because when you're social distancing, it's really hard where you're a meter apart and you want to discuss, and you don't want to turn it into a policing school. You want to make sure it's still fun and engaging for the students. And so I think the key message we've been telling our teachers is, again, we're moving into uncharted territory in terms of what we're doing. Be nimble, be flexible, be okay with failing and trying again, because there's no perfect model, because we all have different situations. We all have different students. We have different rules. and we can't expect to be perfect.
Yeah, you know,
And nobody's
Sandra,
done this before.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to say, nobody's
actually,
done this before. It's
Sandra,
unprecedented.
you brought up something that, oh, sorry. Yeah, I keep cutting out, so am I, can you hear me now?
Yeah, go Ben, you're good.
All right,
Go.
sorry. You raised a really good point, Sandra, and I think that I'm wondering, so we're talking a lot about logistics, you know, which is like super important because it's like how things are going to work. But we're talking about like massive, like, you know, like changes that kids, and some it's like actual trauma, you know, that families have gone through. And so as we roll in these, you know, as we make these plans to like bring kids back and families back, like how are we structuring, you know, the return to include, like we always talk about wellness, and I know a lot of schools are doing a lot to address wellness right now. But as we look forward, how are we building that into the fabric of this like relaunching, you know, like I'm wondering, you know, are we, I don't have the language to discuss these things. I'm not a counselor, you know, I feel inadequate. Right. But I know that, it's going to be important, you know, even we know as teachers, oftentimes when you see, you know, certain behaviors, it's an expression of something. So I'm thinking ahead going, wow, man, we may be dealing with some major behavior issues. And at the same time, we're actually going to be adding restrictions, right? And more rules about how you can behave and stuff like that. So that's just something that's kind of been banging around my head, is like, how are we going to address these so that, you know, we can be kind and honor the experience that everybody has gone through and provide the support, and at the same time keep everybody safe, you know? And not to mention teachers are kind of like just worn out, you know, like, and parents, and yeah, everybody's sort of like burnt out. So like, yeah, anyways, anybody has anybody talked about this?
I was thinking about it today in the training. Actually, it's great that you brought it up, because I felt like a lot of my tools as a teacher have been taken away. So like, I can't give kids high fives. And I know that sounds like a silly thing, but like there might be some kids who have just been waiting to like reconnect with that teacher who they can give a high five, or like, you know, those younger kids giving hugs and things like that. And like, even with my mask on, like you can't tell when I'm smiling. And like, that's a really important way that we communicate with students. Like being able to see, you know, half my face. And so some of those tools for us to deal with student well-being and kind of work through some of that trauma, like they're also going to be gone. I was totally thinking about that today during that training. Like how effective can you be when you have to sit 6 feet away or a meter and a half away from a counselor, and you're sobbing, and all she can do is like throw the box of tissues across the room at you.
Jeff, you have to design a hand. Jeff, you have to design a hand, give one to each student as they come in, and every time you want a high five, you got to go.
I was just going to say something similar, Sandra. It's kind of like we have to invent new norms as far as how we communicate, or like really talk about and verbalize with, you know, different age groups will have different ways of dealing with it. But yeah, like creating new ways that you acknowledge the same feelings. So having hands, or like doing this, or, you know, different things that you might do that can help them communicate all of these different feelings in ways that are newly recognizable. So yeah, maybe making craft hands is a good idea. Yeah.
I think the mask conundrum is interesting. When I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was talking about a doctor who had that same issue, right? Like your bedside manner, and you always have this PPE over your face. They can't see if you're smiling, and so he was telling this story, and I think it was an elementary school student who like drew a picture of him, you know, and like made this badge that he could always wear on his lapel, or, you know, they're talking about creating these stickers that he could put on the outside of his gown, like kind of just replaceable stickers to show like what his face looks like. I'm the doctor who is treating you, because a lot of times you don't know who your doctor is either. It's a little bit different. Your students know who you are, Jeff, right? So they know what your face looks like. But like, how do you put those emotions in front of you, right? So that those kids know, yeah, this is somebody who cares about me. And I think what Tanya said is right. It's how are we going to devise innovative solutions to what we used to take for granted?
Yeah, I totally agree. But and I think educators are so resilient, and everybody, like, just the fact that we're together discussing these things, I'm wondering if like it's actually like being folded into the plans of like, okay, we're gonna start rolling back. People are gonna start showing up. What's the language we're gonna use? How are we gonna broach this? Like, because kids can't verbalize stuff all the time. Like I can't verbalize things a lot of times. And it's so I'm just wondering how we can like sort of normalize it, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Yeah, just normalize this idea that like, hey, it's okay to be like, it's okay to admit that like this has been hard and it's going to be hard, and we're here to support each other, but like create an environment where it's like kind of open and discussed.
I'm also curious. We've talked about like the building, and we've talked about the kids. But someone did mention earlier, it's been a long haul for you guys, not for us yet, for teachers. And I wonder, it's to a degree, it's a kind of professional trauma we've been through, because we've had to learn a whole new thing. And a lot of the stuff we've learned, I believe in the end will be really beneficial, and we will have examined our practice, and we will have torn it apart a little bit, and we'll have to rebuild it in a better way. But that's extremely tiring. And I can imagine a staff getting together after a short summer, or it could be a long summer, but getting together and not being quite ready to take on a brand new year, and being very short, like a principal asks them something and they'll be like, what I just went through last spring and summer. And so I think there's going to be a lot of work to do there as well with teachers, with nurturing them and making sure that they get what they need when we come back.
Here in Hong Kong, they've told us that they'll give us a 3-week heads up if we're going to reopen this year. But we had a unique experience where we had protests happening before the virus. And so we were closed a few times already. And when they reopened us in November, it was a staggered start. And so our end date is mid-June. And at this point, if the government doesn't tell us by May 21st that we're returning, then we're clearly not going back to school. But there is talk of it happening. So I think at this point, our school is actually, we've not completely dismissed the possibility of going back, but being in a primary school in Hong Kong right now, an international school, it's quite unlikely. And we've talked a lot about how the kids will transition to next year. And so one decision the school made that I think was really, really good and has been received well by the community is to roll the kids up in the same class, in the same bunch of students. Normally this time of year, there's input on groupings and switching and what's the best dynamic for next year. And there's pros and cons to keeping them, right? But we felt overall that they didn't have the time together that they could have and should have grown up. And in some ways that'll help them have a smoother start in August. So that's one step we've taken at HKS to make sure that the kids, at least in primary, roll up with a little bit more consistency. And we're talking about how by the end of this school year, can we build in time for those classes to Zoom with next year's teacher, for them to connect one-on-one with their new teachers as they would have, had a little meet the teacher day if we were on campus. They've also, in terms of taking care of the teachers, they've already talked about adjusting our return date in August for our pre-service days, just based on the fact that quarantines will be in effect if people travel this summer. But I'm personally not planning to travel, and I don't know how likely it is that most people would even be able to. And so that point about teachers being fatigued and not really getting a break is very valid. And they've talked about even building in a few days at the end of this school year. Are there pockets of time we can gift teachers with to prepare for next year, or to bring some closure, give you a day off where it's your day to focus on your classroom and think about what you need to reset for next year, and some physical and kind of mental and emotional opportunities for teachers to kind of debrief and pause from this year, and kind of try to start resetting before August so that it's not a full dump in the deep end in August.
I hope you enjoyed today's Spotlight episode. If you would like to hear the rest of the conversation, you can find it on our website at COACHBETTER.tv, or you can download it wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, we're curating all of this content on our remote learning page. I will drop the link in the description box below so you can check out all of the previous conversations and see all of the other resources we are sharing there for you to help support you during this time. And we also have an amazing free offer that we're sharing for educators that I am going to talk about in just one moment. At Eduro, we have been humbled to have had educators from around the world join us in panel conversations and respond to our emergency school closures resources. We want to continue to support you. We know how challenging it is to be an educator right now. We know that school leaders and coaches are looking for ways to keep their community inspired and to relentlessly build community. That's why we've made our online course, Your Connected Classroom, free for you and your peers right now. You can find the link in the description box below. We have been creating community virtually for over a decade now through our Coattail program and through the Coach Microcredential. It's something we know inside and out, and we want to support you through this difficult time. Follow us at Eduro Learning or subscribe to the Coach Better podcast to continue this conversation. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.